Okay, so are you ready for a deep dive?
Always.
Well, this one is going to take us into some seriously dark territory. We're talking about the Stayner
Oh,
brothers.
wow. Stephen and Carrie.
Exactly. You might have heard their names before because their story is one of those that just sticks with you.
It really is.
One brother a national hero and the other, well, a notorious killer.
A story full of contrasts.
And the thread connecting them, a childhood shattered by a truly horrific event.
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Like, how can two people who shared such a traumatic experience end up on such drastically different paths?
Right, and that's what we're going to explore today. We're going to unpack all the complexities of the Stayner brothers' story, examining the twists and turns that led them to their destinies. Because sometimes the truth is stranger and darker than fiction.
And what makes this case so fascinating is how it just throws that whole nature versus nurture debate wide open. Were Stephen and Carrie's paths predetermined, or were they shaped by, the events that unfolded around them?
Exactly. So to understand how these two brothers ended up on such opposite sides of the spectrum, we need to go back to the beginning. December 4th, 1972. 7-year-old Stephen Stayner is walking home from school in Merced, California, when a stranger approaches him.
Oh, this is where it all begins.
Yeah, and the stranger, calling himself Vin Edward Murphy, claims to be collecting donations for his church. Asks Stephen if his family would be interested in contributing.
It's a classic example of what we now call grooming, right?
Oh, definitely.
Parnell was deliberately targeting a child, using a seemingly harmless guise to gain Stephen's trust. Really, just preying on his innocence and good nature.
And tragically, it worked. Stephen, being a kind and trusting kid, tells Parnell that his mother might be interested in donating, and that's when a white Buick pulls up.
And Stephen, without any force or coercion, gets into the car. It's just chilling. A reminder of how easily a predator can manipulate a child, especially when they use deception and trickery instead of brute force.
Now, behind this seemingly ordinary man was a deeply disturbed individual, Kenneth Parnell. This wasn't just some random act of desperation. Parnell had a history of troubling behavior going all the way back to his childhood. I mean, we're talking about arson, self-harm, even impersonating a police officer.
These weren't just isolated incidents. It's like they paint this picture of someone with a very deep-seated psychological disturbance.
Right.
Some experts have even speculated that Parnell may have suffered from pedophilia, sexual attraction to children, or antisocial personality disorder,
Oh, wow.
a condition characterized by a disregard for rules and the rights of others.
So this was the mastermind behind Stephen's kidnapping. And over the next 7 years, Parnell would systematically manipulate and control Stephen, isolating him from his family and the outside world.
He moved Stephen around constantly, renamed him Dennis, and convinced Stephen that his parents no longer wanted him. It was a really calculated effort to just break down Stephen's sense of self and make him completely dependent on Parnell.
It's just unimaginable what Stephen endured during those 7 years, the psychological trauma, the abuse, the constant fear. But in 1980, when Stephen was 14, something incredible happens.
He escapes.
He does. And not only that, he escapes with another young boy, 5-year-old Timmy White, whom Parnell had also kidnapped.
Wow.
They hitchhike to a police station. And as they walk in, Stephen utters those now famous words, "I know my first name is Stephen."
It's iconic, isn't it?
It is. It was a moment that captured the nation's attention. The lost boy returned. And not only had he returned, he had saved another child from a similar fate.
Stephen became an instant hero, a symbol of hope and resilience in the face of unimaginable horror.
It's an incredible story of survival. But sadly, Stephen's story doesn't have a completely happy ending. Reintegrating into his family and normal life after 7 years of captivity proved to be incredibly difficult.
The media attention must have been overwhelming.
Yeah.
And he was bullied at school on top of that. And then the trauma of what he'd endured, it continued to haunt him.
It's a reminder that the scars of trauma run deep, and that even the most resilient individuals need time and support to heal. And tragically, Stephen died in a motorcycle accident in 1989, just 9 years after his escape.
It was a devastating loss, especially given all that he had overcome.
Absolutely. And as we'll see, Stephen's death will have a profound impact on his older brother, Carrie. Because while Stephen was enduring his own personal hell, Carrie was facing a different kind of darkness. A darkness that was brewing in the shadows.
And that's where things start to take a truly disturbing turn. Because while Stephen's story was one of survival and heroism, Carrie's story would become a chilling tale of violence and depravity.
So we just left off talking about the tragic death of Stephen Stayner.
Yeah.
And now we need to shift our focus to his older brother, Carrie.
Okay.
You see, while Stephen was going through this horrific ordeal, Carrie was living through his own silent struggles. Imagine being 11 years old when your little brother just vanishes.
Right.
The fear, the uncertainty, and then years later, the intense relief when he returns. Only for him to be gone again, this time forever.
It's a lot for anyone to process, let alone a young teenager. And in Carrie's case, it really seems that the trauma of Stephen's kidnapping had this really profound and ultimately devastating impact on his life.
Yeah, as we dig deeper into Carrie's life, we start to see this recurring theme of him feeling neglected,
Yeah.
overlooked, maybe even resentful, like he was constantly living in Stephen's shadow.
Right. And it's understandable to a certain extent.
Yeah.
During Stephen's captivity, his parents were understandably consumed with the search for their missing son.
Mhm.
And then when Stephen returned, he became the center of attention,
Right.
the hero who'd escaped a nightmare.
It's natural for Carrie to have felt, I don't know, maybe a sense of being overshadowed, especially after years of dealing with his own emotional turmoil. And this feeling of being overlooked was only compounded by other events in Carrie's life. For instance, he was a talented artist, but his abilities never really got the recognition he seemed to crave. Then there's the unsolved murder of his uncle, Jesse Stayner, which must have added another layer of trauma to an already troubled family dynamic.
Absolutely. These events, coupled with the underlying trauma of Stephen's kidnapping, created this perfect storm for Carrie. And as he got older, there were some disturbing signs that he was really struggling to cope with these inner demons.
You're talking about those incidents where he punched plywood till his hand bled.
Yes.
And that time he talked about driving to work and just killing everyone there.
Exactly. These weren't just teenage angst or typical outbursts. They were clear red flags, indicators of a deeply troubled mind, grappling with rage, violence, and potentially a complete disconnect from reality.
And then, in a twist that seems almost too sinister to be true, Carrie gets a job at Cedar Lodge near Yosemite National Park. I mean, talk about a setting ripe for a dark turn.
Almost as if fate itself was conspiring against him, placing him in a location that would become the backdrop for his descent into darkness.
And that darkness fully manifested in 1999 with the disappearance of 3 women: Carol Sund, her daughter Julie, and their friend Silvina Palazzo. They were staying at Cedar Lodge when they vanished without a trace.
Oh, wow.
The media went into a frenzy, the FBI was called in, and it quickly became one of the largest searches ever conducted in Yosemite National Park.
I can only imagine. The investigation must have been incredibly complex and emotionally charged.
Oh, for sure.
Imagine the pressure on those investigators,
Yeah.
knowing that 3 lives were at stake. And the fact that these women disappeared from such a, beautiful and seemingly safe location like Yosemite only added to the mystery and the terror.
Weeks later, they found the bodies of Carol and Silvina in the trunk of their burned-out rental car.
Oh, my God.
But Julie was still missing. And then the FBI received a hand-drawn map with a chilling message. It said, we had fun with this one.
That's awful.
It led them to Julie's body.
It was truly horrifying. And that message accompanying the map, it just sent chills down everyone's spine. It speaks to a level of depravity and cruelty that's almost beyond comprehension.
Of course, the investigators were chasing every possible lead.
Right.
2 ex-convicts, Michael Larwick and Eugene Dykes, became the prime suspects.
Oh, well.
They seemed to fit a certain profile, a history of violence, a connection to the area. Larwick was even found with a rocket launcher, which didn't exactly help their case.
I can imagine.
Right, but they fiercely denied any involvement, and Larwick even offered to take a polygraph test and give his DNA. But it turned out the investigators were barking up the wrong tree.
So who was it?
And as the investigation dragged on, another tragedy struck. In July 1999, 5 months after the first murders, another woman disappeared. Joy Armstrong, a naturalist working in Yosemite.
Oh, no.
And get this, her body was found decapitated, her head floating in the water near her cabin. The brutality of the crime just shocked even the most seasoned investigators.
The evidence at the scene, it pointed to a meticulously planned and ruthlessly executed murder. This wasn't just a random act of violence. It was calculated, cold-blooded.
And guess whose car was seen near Joey Armstrong's cabin around the time of the murder?
Oh, no, whose?
Carrie Stayner's.
Oh, wow.
So they bring him in, initially, as a witness.
Right.
But things took a shocking turn when, while being questioned by the FBI, Carrie confessed not only to killing Joy Armstrong, but also to the murders of Carol, Julie, and Sylvina.
Wait, so the brother of this national hero, a seemingly ordinary guy, confessed to these brutal murders?
It was a stunning revelation, sent shockwaves through the community and across the nation.
Hold on. He just admitted to all of this, like over a casual pizza dinner with the FBI?
Well, not quite. It wasn't exactly a casual confession. He tried to bargain with the FBI.
He did.
He wanted pictures of young girls. He wanted his family to receive the reward money being offered for information leading to the killer, and he wanted to be placed in a prison near his family.
Wow, talk about a twisted set of priorities. It's like he was trying to leverage these horrific crimes for personal gain.
It speaks to a deeply disturbed psyche. The fact that he valued those pictures of young girls more than the well-being of his family or even his own freedom is deeply unsettling.
It is.
So he confesses, and the nation is left reeling. Stephen Stayner, the hero, had a brother who became a monster. It's just this chilling contrast, and it raises so many questions about what shapes us as human beings.
It really challenges our understanding of nature versus nurture. On one hand, you have Stephen, who endured years of horrific abuse, yet emerged as a symbol of hope and resilience. On the other hand, you have Carrie, who, while not subjected to the same level of direct abuse, seemingly succumbed to the darkness that surrounded him.
It's tempting to say that Carrie was just a product of his environment.
Yeah.
The trauma of his childhood, the feeling of living in Stephen's shadow, the potential genetic predisposition to the mental illness that ran in his family.
That's certainly a compelling argument, and there's no doubt that Carrie's upbringing and the events that unfolded around him played a significant role in shaping who he became. But it's not that simple, is it?
Right, because if a traumatic environment inevitably leads to violence, wouldn't Kenneth Parnell, Stephen's kidnapper, also fit that mold? Parnell had his own deeply troubled childhood filled with abuse and neglect.
Right. That's the crux of the nature versus nurture debate. It's rarely a clear-cut case of one or the other. It's often this complex interplay of genetic predispositions, environmental factors, and individual choices.
So how do we make sense of Carrie's actions? Was he destined to become a killer? Or was it a series of unfortunate events that pushed him over the edge?
Well, psychiatrists who evaluated Carrie after his arrest pointed to a history of mental illness in the Stayner family. His father had been ordered into therapy for assaulting his daughters, and Carrie himself had exhibited inappropriate behavior with his sister.
So there's a possibility of a cycle of abuse and dysfunction within the family that may have spanned generations.
It's a tragic pattern that we see repeated all too often. And we can't overlook the fact that Carrie himself was a victim of sexual abuse at the hands of his uncle, Jesse Stayner, shortly after Stephen disappeared.
Wait, Jesse, the uncle who was later murdered.
Yes. And the police even reopened Jesse's murder case after Carrie's confession, suspecting Carrie might have been involved.
Wow, it's just layer upon layer of trauma and darkness.
It's a deeply disturbing family history. And it makes you wonder how much of Carrie's behavior was a result of his genes, how much was influenced by his environment, and how much was driven by his own choices.
It's a question that might never have a definitive answer.
True. But what's fascinating here is that this case goes beyond the typical true crime narrative. It challenges us to think about the ripple effects of trauma, the unseen struggles others might be facing, and the importance of recognizing and addressing those struggles before it's too late.
And that's what makes this deep dive so impactful. It's not just a story about crime and punishment. It's a story about family, resilience, and the hidden darkness that can exist within seemingly ordinary people. Man, it's hard to wrap your head around a story like this.
No, right.
Two brothers linked by blood and this incredibly traumatic event, but their lives unfold in such dramatically opposite ways. It makes you wonder, what's the takeaway here? What can we learn from the Stayner brothers' story that goes beyond the headlines?
I think what's so compelling about this case is how it forces us to confront the complexities of human nature. We like to think that good and evil are clear-cut, that there are heroes and villains. But the Stayner brothers' story, it blurs those lines.
It definitely shatters the illusion that we can easily categorize people or, predict their paths based on their experiences.
Right. And I think that's a powerful reminder for all of us.
Oh, yeah.
We never truly know what someone else is carrying inside.
Right.
What demons they might be battling, what scars they might be hiding.
Yeah. It makes you think about all the untold stories, all the hidden struggles that people are dealing with every day.
Absolutely. And it really underscores the importance of empathy.
Yeah.
Of recognizing that everyone has a story. And those stories often involve pain, loss, and trauma. Even those who seem to have it all together,
Right.
even those who wear a mask of normalcy might be fighting an internal battle that we know nothing about.
And that's what makes this deep dive so much more than just a true crime story.
Right, for
It's
sure.
a story about family, about resilience, and about the hidden darkness that can exist within seemingly ordinary people.
It's a story that reminds us that trauma can manifest in unpredictable ways,
Yeah.
and that the choices we make, while influenced by our experiences, are ultimately our own.
Yeah, it's a story that stays with you long after you've heard it.
Yeah,
And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me and hopefully for our listeners is the importance of compassion.
I completely agree. Compassion for others and compassion for ourselves. Because we all have our own stories, our own struggles, and sometimes the kindest thing we can do is simply listen, offer support, and recognize that healing takes time, and it takes understanding.
Well said. And on that note, we wrap up our deep dive into the lives of Stephen and Carrie Stayner, two brothers, forever linked by tragedy, whose stories serve as a powerful reminder of the complexities of human nature and the importance of compassion in a world that often feels cold and unforgiving.
It's a story that reminds us that even in the darkest of places, there is always hope. And that even in the face of unimaginable suffering, the human spirit has an incredible capacity for resilience, for love, and for forgiveness.
Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay compassionate.